I think that the video I shared with you about the no Nucor Steel Company having sort of taken the lead over U.S. Steel, primarily because they're uh, sort of able to start all over with new technology and new techniques. And one of the interesting things that they're doing is they're working pretty much with just recycled steel.
Hmm.
And so they've got a lot of innovations that I think are, because I did, you probably saw those charts that that gal was using. Bessemer was from 1900 to 1965. Open Hearth was from 1960 to 1990. And basic oxygen process was from 1955 to 2010. And then the electronic arc furnace is from 1915. It really tailed back to the earlier times, but it didn't get really popular up until around 1970 or 1980 up to 2010, 2020.
That's what I was talking about, three waves of innovation.
Yeah. So plus not mining ore, but using the recycled ore as your resource.
Yeah,
Uh, yeah, it was
it's the
she
most
was
recycled of any of the materials that we recycle.
I
right.
have something I can share if you want a random bit.
Sure.
Okay. Let me see if I can do this without messing up. Share, let's see here. Entire screen. Okay. So what I've got going here is I have, remember my old greenhouse gas eliminator? Well, what I've got is I've gone out and done some research and I found the prices. And so these are them. And best price is 28 million for 700 tons per day. That's in Billings, Montana. So I'm pretty happy with this. So 28 million to get rid of 700 ton, to gasify 700 tons of trash per day. I think it's eminently affordable. So I'm rather proud of this. I'll stop sharing.
Are you just gasifying?
Yes, that's what I asked for. I'm and here small scale gasifiers, medium scale, which is the best price point, and then large scale. And I think there must be something wrong. That seems excessive. But you can see 2 million to 10 million. And so what I did is just went for the maximum and said, where's the best price point? And came up with this table.
Well, that's still a carbon emission process, isn't it? Is it not?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a gasification process.
How much extra would it cost to put a carbon capture on that process?
It already does. It has negative pressure inside the vessel, and so the worst that will happen is you'll suck gas in, but it won't go out because it's negative ambient pressure, air
Yeah,
pressure.
but you have to be probably compressing it after that.
No, you can, well, you could RNG. You have to really clean it up to do that. I
Yeah,
would probably
exactly.
go for bio oil. It's like diesel crude and a very efficient way to move carbon around. In terms of going for more, I'd grow hemp. You know, it's one of the best suppliers of carbon dioxide out of the air. So why am I not expanding? Let me see what's going
And
on.
what are the operating costs to run it?
Um, I haven't figured that in. There's grinder steps and things like that. What I would do is probably add maybe another few $100,000 to $1 million onto the price per unit to handle. There's a front end kind of grinder because you have to have your sizes you can't throw a big piece and a small piece in because
Yeah,
they
you need to
burn
consider
differently.
all the operating costs. Typically, those gasifiers run with natural gas, don't they?
Well, the gasifier actually gets started with methane, but once it runs, it produces its own heat.
Okay.
Yeah, let me see if I can unshare here. Why am I not able to unshare? Boy, technical mysteries for me today.
Do you have multiple monitors?
I I I don't right now.
It
Uh,
makes it much easier.
oh yeah, I love it. So let's see now if I can get in. Okay,
The
here
stop
we're
sharing option should be in the Zoom controls.
okay, yeah, I see they're not showing for me.
Well, go find your Zoom window.
Okay, Zoom window. Oh, Zoom. Okay. Zoom US. I can delete this, but that's not going to help. How do I get back?
Stan, do you have the capability of stopping somebody's sharing?
I'm
I
looking.
think it's right next to the person's name.
Got it.
Okay, thank you.
Wow, I'm
Boy,
learning.
I bring you new problems. Let me see. Okay, yeah,
It's
I'm
good.
cool.
Better now than later, I guess.
Exactly.
Morning, Tom.
Morning.
I have a question for you guys. I've been reading a lot about the Elon Musk water engine and running on water and running it actually running it on hydrogen and that kind of thing.
Right.
And I know there was a guy down in southern Wisconsin that did that about 10 years ago with a little Ford pickup. But it sounds like Elon's got it down to a science now, and thinks that and he said, producing hydrogen and storing it, it just doesn't work. The thing has the ability to fill up in 5 seconds and all that kind of stuff. What do you think of that?
Storing hydrogen is a real pain.
But separating oxygen and hydrogen from water
It's
and
also a pain.
burning them, running them through a,
Electrolyzer.
well, running them through an electrolyzer separates them.
Yeah.
Then running them through a, um,
They
fuel
go through, fuel cell.
and using the electricity to turn an electric motor.
Yeah, that's
It's
his
a much
his
better
thing.
way to do your motion in terms of efficiency if you don't lose too much to heat in the electrolyzer and the fuel cell.
Mhm.
So if he's got those, do we want to say down pat? If he's got those two things manageable, then potentially that could be a very nice solution. And if there's anybody that can do it, Tesla seems like the organization that might.
Yeah.
Yeah, he said that it's a world-class change, moving maybe from petroleum and all the wars that we've been fighting over petroleum and that kind of stuff. So it sounds like, I say, I do know this guy 10 years ago that did this little Ford pickup down in Wisconsin, and he had luck with it, but it sounds like a major change if that can be done.
Technically, it's certainly doable. The question is, what's the efficiency look like?
Yeah.
With an
You could,
internal combustion car, we're looking at 25 to 35% efficiency from the chemical energy in the gasoline to the motion of the car and the load. That leaves a lot of room for improvement.
Yeah. Yeah.
you could use the heat from the electro
Elijah,
whatever to preheat the water before separating it.
Mm,
if you need that,
Yeah.
turn it to steam. Superheated
If
steam.
you if you metered the water out in tiny amounts, you might be able to get flash steam.
Well, to me, it caught my attention because out at U of M Morris, with their wind turbines, they've been producing hydrogen, and they've got some vehicles running on that, and then using it also as ammonia and running on that. And it's an interesting thing. I mean, like I say, according to him, um, it was not easy to produce hydrogen and store it and ship it and stuff because of it tends to go through whatever you're trying to put it in. But just doing it on site and getting it to work, really, that sounds exciting.
Mhm.
all
Yeah,
depends on
especially
the efficiency.
if it'll run on small scale, like a farm or something, you've got huge amounts of biomass coming out of it. And you could produce methane and bio oil and all of those things.
Yeah.
Yeah, but we're talking about it for vehicles right now, right?
Oh, okay. Lost that thread.
Yeah, it's hydrogen to electric, like David said, and he did not get into the efficiency side of it, but I did wonder about that too.
Again, efficiency and cost,
Yeah,
the usual. Um,
Killers.
Time you're talking about disruptive innovation, you want to ask, how efficient is it and what's the cost going to be?
yeah,
And
Oh,
those are going to change depending on scale.
and what are the rules?
Well, the first rule
Rules
should be
can
about
probably
safety.
change. Well, not the rules of physics.
No, I meant the legislature's whim of trying to impose their understanding of cartoon physics on the real world.
Well, the first rule should be about safety.
That's
So,
a good plan.
yeah. I know people say that, and I always think, well, gasoline's not exactly the safest thing either. So,
Yeah.
yeah,
Gene,
we
would
have
you
lots
like
of
to
rules about
introduce
that.
yourself? I believe the rest of us are regulars and everybody pretty well knows us, but
Sure, sure. I've come a couple of times before, and I thought this today's topic sounded interesting and so forth. So I'm glad to be back. Um,
welcome.
I'm retired. Kind of come from the commercial real estate business, but um, have a organization called Beloved Community Action, which is about kind of fostering interdependent um, systems on the world, and so that's kind of my interest where I come from.
Welcome. Tom, would
Thank you.
you like to moderate and call on people during the discussion periods?
Okay. See, the presenter today, um,
You're a
kind of
little
has me.
quiet to my ears.
I am quiet.
Yeah, you could turn your volume up a little bit.
The presenter has a little say in that, so I don't know at what points they're going to want to take QA right now.
Stan, were you first?
No, Jason was.
Okay, Jason?
I just posted in chat a hyperlink. Recently, a large volume deposit of lithium has been found within the United States, I believe the southeastern United States. This could be a game changer because lithium is a rare earth element that's critical to much of renewable energy and technology, some of which we'll be talking about today. So if you want to click on the link, you can read more about that recent find. Also, we recently found a large deposit of, I think, natural gas underneath the ocean. A huge deposit of energy underneath the ocean just recently, and it's going to it has the potential to alleviate energy supplies. This is some, I don't know too. I can't speak. I was looking for the link on that as well, but I haven't found it yet. Anyway, that's something that I think bears some discussion or conversation. Lithium in the United States. That's if we can get around the roadblocks to mining it, because it seems that as of late, it's been difficult to mine anything in this country anymore without people, complaining excessively. We want to save the environment. Unfortunately, we have to mine elements to make that a reality. But, the environmental.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, Stan.
Dan, you had something?
Yeah, there's a company, and I posted this in the chat. It's a German company called CMBLU that has developed a organic process that uses carbon and oxygen and hydrogen for a redux flow style battery. So this is a grid storage battery, but has absolutely no limitations as far as the scarcity of the materials, nor the danger of the materials. And it seems like a real no downside to this system. So I would recommend. I think I sent out a text or an email to a couple of you guys. I don't know if any of you got that or looked at it, but I have a kind of a list of targeted, poor targeted people that I put my videos on. That's all I do nowadays is basically share videos, but it's something that I think really could be a game changer, because there's just no downside as far as the materials and the longevity and the sustainability of the actual materials involved.
The two I was asking about with regard to the water engine also apply: cost and efficiency.
Yeah.
We
Yeah.
won't know till they actually work up those numbers.
Yeah, I think that there's a, I think there was a lab, Argonne, is it Argonne lab or?
Argonne National Laboratories in Illinois.
And I think that they're doing a research on this process.
Yeah.
That flow battery is going to be installed at Great River Energy next year, and XL is also got a bunch of them they're putting in along with their 1 million solar panels up at Becker. So I'm assuming both of those companies did major research to determine that was a good way to go.
Yeah, that's the iron air. That sounds like the winner too.
Lionel's next.
Okay, Tom, I just wanted to say, if you look at participants, instead of picking them off the screen, you'll get them in order. When you raise your hand, you go right to the head of the queue. yeah, so I wanted to pass that on. Thank you.
Yeah, that's how Zoom works.
Okay, Carol.
Yeah, just a minor vocabulary correction. Lithium is not a rare earth element. It's number 3 in the periodic table, atomic number 3. And the rare earths are the ones that come after hafnium. And I was just taking a look at a periodic table to hafnium is 72. So the thing with the rare earths is that from the standpoint of atomic structure, they're a 3 shell filling in underneath a couple of electrons in a 4 shell, and it makes them chemically very difficult to separate. And we don't have that problem with lithium. It's just sitting out there.
Well,
Yeah,
it's,
I think I'm next. There are a lot of battery technologies coming down the pike. I mean, lithium ion is, I think, going to be obsolete fairly soon. Sodium ion is one
Yep.
technology that can replace it, and sodium is very plentiful, obviously. So hopefully we won't have to mine lithium much in the future. So I think the technology, there are lots of different battery technologies coming down the pike. Some of them are hard to scale down to flashlight size, but others could be. So
Well, I
within
think we're
the
going
next
to
few years, we're
seriously
going to have something pretty good.
have commercial batteries that depend on lithium for the next 10 years. I mean, it's not that this discovery is not a good thing, or that it's the lithium technology is obsolete.
Right, but starting up to get
Things that are coming
if you're
along.
talking about mining it from the idea to actually getting it out of the ground and into production is several years. So it can maybe bridge a gap, but not for very long, I think. More mining. It is after 10, well, it's 10 o'clock right now. So we should get started on our presentation.
okay. As I indicated, the topic this morning is a book by the title of Brighter by Adam Dorr from RethinkX. Basically, RethinkX is a think tank that Tony Seba and I'm blanking on his partner, James Arbid, put together something like 5 to 10 years ago. Tony Seba is a adjunct professor at Stanford, teaches disruptive innovation and such concepts to startup and other students from the San Francisco area. I first came across him.
Sorry, are we recording? I don't see
Yes.
the flag.
Yeah, it's recording.
Okay, thank you. Sorry
I
for that.
first came across him when he published a book in around 2014, talking about disruptive innovation in transportation. But he has written a number of other books. He wrote a book in around 2009, I believe, on solar trillions, where he predicted that we would transition to solar energy because he was seeing the cost curve for solar photovoltaic on a log scale increasing at about 20% per year. It's relatively easy to analyze when you see those kinds of numbers. When you see something transitioning like that, you can pretty well expect that as the production increases, the cost will come down. 20% is a rather amazing number. That's similar to what we've seen on Moore's Law, and I'll get back to that later on. Moore's Law, we have about 120 years of history now, and on a log scale, the increase has been relatively consistent. If anything, it may be speeding up a little. When you see those kinds of trends, you can expect them to go until they hit about 70% of the market for that kind of product. At about 70%, they start slowing down because they've saturated the market. That's relatively important to consider when you're looking at technological advances. And I've been looking at technological advances since Clayton Christensen published The Innovator's Dilemma in around, I think it was 1998. David Keenan and I did a presentation for the Minnesota Futurists around 2005, I think, on disruptive innovation and the innovator's dilemma. So it's not as if this stuff is particularly new. I don't know if any of you pay attention to investment, but ARC is a company in New York that made headlines 4 or 5 years ago when their investment results were so much better than everybody else's that year. They target disruptive innovation. At any rate, I would like to show you a video from RethinkX. If I can share screen, which I think I can. Now, if this is coming through properly, Chris?
Okay, I am not a pessimist, but my responsibility as a listener is to challenge the ideas to see if they hold up to scrutiny. And I agree with this gentleman that everything that he said is good for the environment. I think there's no doubt about that. And yet, my question is, are they good for people? That's not the same thing. And I think each of these has a potential dark side for people. For example, the labor. Oh, the robotics are great, but what are people going to do? Are people going to become useless, right? Is there going to have to be a universal basic income, et cetera, et cetera? What about transportation? Self-driving cars are great for the environment, but are they great for people? Will that eliminate freedom of people to go every place. Will that put too much control in the hands of government, who control where the cars go and things like that? So I am not a pessimist nor an optimist. I'm neither. I just want to know what is true. And I agree that these are good for the environment, but are they good for people? For example, energy, how reliable will this energy be when we have no control of the environment? I think his list of energy sources should include nuclear. Anyway, let's examine his ideas critically to see if they stand up to scrutiny rather than just swallowing them whole. Think about the non-intended consequences of his ideas. There are always non-intended consequences. Let's not just go skipping off down the yellow brick road, and see and hope that his ideas really do create a better future. But let's not go there without being critical of them.
Okay. Can I be critical of your comment about including nuclear?
Yes, please.
So far, nuclear has always been done in large quantities. You have the economies of scale were the only way they knew how to build early nuclear plants. The federal government did put nuclear propulsion in submarines and ships. They've been a significant advantage, but the only entity in the world that could afford it was a national government. They are very expensive by comparison with photovoltaics. Okay?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
So currently, they're very slow, they're very large, and they're very expensive. Until that changes, don't talk to me about nuclear, okay? Now, the potential is that they may, and they've been talking about this for 15 years that I'm aware of, that you can make a small nuclear power plant and put it in a container-sized package and ship it anywhere you want. But that still has not been anywhere near cheap enough to compete with fossil fuels, basically generators that we lug around in a suitcase-sized package.
It should be part of the equation, even if it's not a solution now.
At this point, don't even bother wasting the R&D. That's my opinion. But
Yeah.
then I'm only running the discussion.
Yeah, I disagree with you. I think it's worth the R&D.
Okay, well, take a look at one of Breiter's videos where they talk about nuclear,
Okay.
but not today.
Okay, good. Thank you.
Sure.
I'd like to take issue with a few things, but I just want to talk about one right now.
Okay.
That Dor said is, well, by the way, the video that I was getting, the video lagged the audio by several seconds. I don't know if everyone else
Yeah,
had that.
sorry about that, but I can't do anything about it.
So that was at your point of origin. Okay.
Some of them are even worse than this one.
One of the things he said was that talking about implementing these changes, that he's optimistic, but he said that it is getting solved in areas of economic prosperity, places that can afford these changes, and I'd say that's not true. There's been no progress, basically, because of entrenched economic interests holding back that progress. And regardless of whether it's a rich economy we're talking about, national economy, or a poor one, the problem is the same. There's a lot of resistance to change. And until we can somehow get past that, these changes are not going to get implemented, or they'll get implemented very slowly, regardless of the economic advantage of them, because it's an economic disadvantage to the entrenched interests.
Well, and there you get into the question of disruptive innovation. Kodak was originally the patent holder for digital photography. They had it long before anybody else.
Mm-hmm.
They were not successful in disrupting their own market position with this newfangled idea. In fact, they couldn't even justify manufacturing a digital camera for public consumption. That's been typical of disruptive innovation ever since Clayton Christensen started talking about it 25 years ago, 30 years ago. Who's next?
Sam.
I'm just going to say, Chris, that there is definitely a cost of doing these changes and doing these innovations to people, but there's also the cost of not doing it. And I think that we're seeing huge doses of what's happened, the wrath of nature regarding our environment. And I know it's a tough sale when people's jobs are at stake, but I think that there is got to be a point to where innovations in the job market and training for new careers has to be promoted as a viable solution to these situations. With the, I mean, especially if you're supposedly, imagine you're a coal worker and you have a chance to shift your career into something that's cleaner and not quite so dangerous as far as your job risks are concerned. I would think that.
Imagine you're a coal worker and your alternative is to not have a job.
Well, what if you have a opportunity to work in a solar facility or a battery facility or a wind tower facility or something where that those opportunities are basically, aligned with your success as a family and your success as a sustainable planet.
If, and that's a big word, if that's the alternative, then that's terrific.
And that's part of what this discussion is all about. Can we see what's coming down the pike early enough to manage it?
If it's possible to do a cost-benefit analysis, which it's probably not because we'd have to know the future, but if it were possible to do a cost-benefit analysis, then that should, and get the right answer, then we should do whatever is best. There is definitely a cost-benefit equation. We just don't know what it is. We shouldn't ignore that if there's going to be cost and benefits. We shouldn't assume it's all going to be benefits. I just don't know if we can analyze what the ratio of cost benefit is, but we should at least explore it.
Anytime you talk about complex systems, there probably are lots of possible answers. And anytime you're talking about human systems, you're talking about complex systems.
If I may add on to what I was just commenting about a minute ago, as far as cost benefit analysis, it depends on your time horizon.
Yeah.
I mean, the people basically who control the economy are looking at the short term, their own profits in the near term. And when disruptive technology comes along, they're going to resist that because it'll reduce their profits in the short term. And so that's where we are right now. That's why there's not much happening to mitigate climate change at this point.
Well, also the most cost benefit analysis are done on a human time scale. Most human beings are not willing to have their lives ruined now for the benefit of an improved life 1,000 years from now.
Or even 50
These
years from
most
now.
cost benefit analysis are within the lifetime, within 100 years. Beyond that, mostly people don't care about it.
I'd say most cost benefit analysis have about a 1 year time horizon. That's the problem.
Good point.
Kerry, go ahead.
All right. At risk of sounding like the class Luddite, the video to me sounded a little bit like a sales pitch. I tend to think that terms like clean energy and sustainable are more marketing terms than something really tangible. Certainly you can do things better than and or worse. But, strip mine tailings are strip mine tailings. Right? It's not like one is, gets anointed with this environmental, I don't know, sustainability or cleanliness mantle. As far as his video, solar and wind were the only energy sources I saw there. Heat pumps is just an output device. Batteries are just a storage system, right? It's a fancy fuel tank. You still got to fill it with something. And absent something like the advent of an efficient fusion energy source, I don't know if we're ever going to see an energy return on energy investment like the early oil stage of industrial development. I mean, that was like the densest, cheapest, easiest, low-hanging fruit that human race has ever had.
Absolutely.
And a lot of these things are going to become more viable as the price of the old school stuff increases, but that doesn't make things better. Now, whether they can get prices down below those early industrial, input costs, I'm skeptical, but, I've been wrong many, 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 many times. So we'll see. But then the other issue there is, as costs come down, utilization goes up, and now you're looking at needing to, increase your resource inputs. And some of these things are not necessarily renewable. So, I mean, like, plastics. Are we producing more plastics? Are we producing less plastics? I mean, these are kind of the things I'm interested in right at the moment. But anyway, thanks.
Okay, I think
I'm
Kerry,
assuming you can see
final.
the causal feedback loops drive disruption poster that I shared.
Yes.
Yes.
This is from RethinkX and talks about the virtuous cycles and the vicious cycles associated with disruptive innovation. In that early stage where there's 0 to 5% of the market, it's easy enough to see if something is increasing exponentially. It's not making a difference in the marketplace, but if the sales are doubling over a certain period of time, that's pretty obvious if you look at the numbers. As that starts to happen, the costs actually tend to come down. The revenues hopefully need to support the research and development to improve the production costs. As you drop the price, you get more public acceptance, higher revenues, higher margins, more investment, better capabilities, economies of scale. All of those lead to more government support and more variety in product, more ability to compete. If all of those things line up, they're really rather hard to stop, and they generate more support from the people who use them. Basically, that's why natural gas was out competing coal over the 10 years that he showed on the chart. And coal dropped from 80% down to 10% over that 10 years. That's that vicious cycle, the death spiral. The old energy system tends to have lower revenues, higher costs, lower margins, less public acceptance, less investment, reverse economies of scale, less government support, and less social license. Even if it's bad for people, it's going to be hard to stop. Who's next?
I know.
Thank you. I think basically that his exponential curve is way too tall and way too steep. And the reason I say that is we're looking at a curve probably from the USA. And if you bring in the rest of humanity, humankind, I think that that will flatten the curve because they're not going to be adopters of this, if ever. And so I think the curve is just wacko. So that's my opinion. Thank you.
Okay, H. Tom. You're still muted, H. Tom.
There. I think of these things in terms of audio. There was a time when the LP ruled supreme. And then there was, some of you may have heard me talk about this before, the improved vinyl. JVC actually implemented 4-track stereo on a vinyl disc. It was a very high quality gimmick. It worked well. But it went nowhere. And then the CD came along and vinyl essentially went away. Vinyl is now coming back, and I was at the store the other day and someone said, "Did you want that in CD or vinyl?" And I said, "CD." And I'm surprised. And I said, "I can't hear the difference anymore." And he said, "Now that is a sad point, but you're right. I can't either. Why do I keep buying those?" Anyway, it's change happens, and for good reasons and bad reasons, things come and go. JVC Vinyl 4 disappeared in the past. But speaking of the past, just briefly, one of the early Robert Heinlein juveniles back in the 1950s had a nuclear-powered automobile. Nuclear reactor was a closed-loop steam system. Boiled something, wasn't water, that rotated a shaft that you could, anyway. Nuclear cars are old.
Doug.
Yeah, one of the current things that to me seems to prove this point is I look at my old company, XL Energy, one of the larger investor owns in the country, and hey, they're putting in 1 million solar panels up at Becker. with a lot more to go, and they're dropping off their coal plants. I mean, one is already shut down, two more are going to be shut down the next couple of years. I mean, that to me, when a company like that, and they're doing it, for economics, but they're also doing it, for climate and things like that. So it's been a long push. I remember in the old days that, coal was actually, we were bringing in coal trains, 100-unit trains with 100 tons of coal on them and flipping them and all that kind of stuff. It's amazing how they've changed. And what they've done is to make sure that the people that are there working in the coal plants end up having a job going forward, either in the new system. So anyway, it's just I think that's a great example of forward thinking.
Jason.
I think part of what Mr. Christoffel was trying to, that the environmentalists, the greenies, the environmentalists, whatever you want to call the organizations that advocate for the environment, they would be more successful if they would be more pragmatic in terms of economic policy and considerations as far as the economy goes in general. Too often, environmentalists in general consider the private sector or private industry to be their enemy. And in some cases, in the past, historically, they have been. But I think we've seen large corporations and medium-sized ones become much more environmentally conscious and friendly over the preceding decades, not just because their consumers, their clients demand it, but because they don't want to be seen that way. And so I would say that environmentalists and environmental groups would be more effective if they would work with rather than against the private sector, because I believe ultimately the solution to many of these challenges lie within innovation in the private industry. And that really makes the most amount of sense. Thank you.
Okay, I'm next. I just wanted to respond to something I think Kerry said earlier. He was talking about energy. Of the 4 disruptive technologies that Dora was talking about, energy, transportation, food, and labor. Energy is not just energy production. It's energy storage and energy transmission also, which are very important and have an effect. So it's the production, storage, and transmission together that are important. So batteries, even though it's energy storage, have a big effect on implementation of things such as solar and wind power, because they need the storage because they're intermittent. And so battery technologies and type of things like advances there will have an effect on adoption of these new disruptive technologies in other areas. Heat pumps are another way to produce energy too, but transmission is an important factor that we're going to have to deal with, and I think that heat pumps are going to help that because they're more local. They're not so centralized.
Well, heat pumps are actually a multiplier. If you look at resistance heating with electricity, the best you can do is 1-to-1. If you're just moving heat around, Heat pumps these days work in the 2 or 3, even 4 or 5 times as much energy moved around as the energy it takes to move it around.
Are
So
we
in
talking
terms of
heat pumps?
efficiency, you can't beat a heat pump any other way that we know of.
Are we talking heat pumps like a form of geothermal, or are we talking heat pumps just for heating?
No, no, a heat pump is a way of transferring heat using a typically refrigerant compression cycle, electricity.
Right, right. But there's also the element of running, storing heat and using that as a kind of a battery.
Yeah, but typically with resistance heating, you don't have a lot of losses to heat. I mean, the losses to heat are exactly what you're looking for. It's 100% efficient. And that's typically the best you can do with resistance heating.
Right. So I think heat pumps and batteries are part of the equation of this disruptive technology.
Yep.
Go ahead, Gene.
Well, I just wanted, we kind of danced around this kind of socioeconomic idea. Tom, you brought it up first, I think, but, point out, countries like Venezuela, Russia, the Gulf states, there's a lot of countries out there whose oil and gas are major parts of their economy. And so to switch that, they're going to be really slow to do it unless there's some kind of incentive put on them to equalize that. I mean that, you're talking about big enough share of their economy that you're going to have massive social disruption if you pulled that out. And so those are real problems. I mean, getting past the technology issues of whether or not there's technology that can solve these problems. The bigger issue, I think, is kind of the geopolitical, social economic issue of adoption.
If I might address that for a second, um, one of the points that RethinkX makes is that disruptive innovation is very hard to stop because it's happening for economic reasons. We pay something like, 15 cents a kilowatt hour? Between 11 and 15 in the United States. Some of the best solar contracts in the world have been implemented at 3 cents a kilowatt hour in Dubai. In good locations, solar photovoltaic is coming in at a fifth of what the end-use customer has to pay in the United States, where we've been developing electric systems for 100 years. That's going to be tough. Countries that stay with fossil fuels not only have to deal with the pollution, they have to deal with the cost that they're paying for the product when they could be paying less. Solar photovoltaics in the next 10 years will be cheap enough as to be cheaper than the cost for the fossil fuels to run the plant if you already have paid for the plant. In other words, you're choosing to spend more to run the old plant than it would cost you to buy and install the new system. Because the fuel is free. I mean, we have more solar energy hits the earth what, in an hour than we use in a year. There's lots and lots of solar energy if we can take advantage of it cheaply and efficiently. And that's what solar photovoltaics are doing for us right now. Who's next?
Sam.
I just posted a YouTube about energy cost in Arizona. And this really blows my mind because there's been a turn to the right in the political situation in Arizona where there's the idea of renewable energy, solar panels and so forth. People with doing solar panels are being penalized economically, and there's and their rates for their utility bills are doubling and tripling. And there's a testimony of some people here in this video describing how their energy bill, they thought it was a fluke, or they thought it was a scam. They got a bill that was 3 times what it was prior to their, just a month prior to that bill. And they're claiming that it's down to eating or paying for their air conditioning, and they like their air conditioning down there a lot. I think they've had so many years, so many days, they have long streaks of days over 100. Bottom line is that I think that the efficiency of the older fossil energy strategies are going to become an issue. I'll be addressing this next week, and that there's just the possibility of making a better, and I think that the other thing, the argument that came up in that video was about, well, this is the oldest thing, I'm tired of hearing it. Oh, the wind doesn't always blow and the sun doesn't always shine. They like to erase or remove that notion of storage, which has been coming on in a very strong way, that I think evens out that discussion. And it's like what Doug was saying about Minnesota. It's hard to believe that in a state like Arizona, where Southern California, New Mexico, I remember when solar panel was just starting, Solar City was just coming out. They found it very easy to come right in, install solar panels on your house, and they just did it for you. You didn't have to pay for it. And then what you would do is you'd pay for the solar panels, but you're paying less for your solar panels than you would for your energy bill, because there's so much solar down there that they were able to get their energy bill covered. And Australians found the same thing to be true. We tend to think of that as not being so applicable for us in Minnesota, but it's starting to get that way for us as well. So I think that there's a lot to be said for maybe switching the information about what's going on in such a way that there is going to be a bridge in the information gap about what's going on with the energy, because I think that we're really seeing the fossil fuel companies with their handle on the communication systems in America to really try to blot this out and to erase it so that it doesn't have to be something they have to worry about, because they have what they call stranded assets.
Yep.
Okay. Did you have a response, David?
Well, the stranded assets are going to be stranded. They're going to have a lot of trouble going back to the way things used to be, because technology has moved on. And the costs to compete with the new technology are excessive. Why would why would any customer want to pay more for energy just because it came from an existing coal plant or a nuclear plant than they would have to pay for photovoltaic energy?
Yeah, I'm sure that by 1910, there were a lot of unused buggy whips. Harry, you're next.
Okay, so regarding LPs, I hear that more LPs are sold today than CDs, which I find fascinating. So sometimes what is old is new again.
Well, it's because of streaming.
Right.
Oh, I'm sure that streaming is the absolute dominant form of music, but in terms of CDs versus records, people are buying more records, which I don't know. I find that fascinating. I kind of like the idea, although my turntable is still kind of broken and in storage. Maybe
You need a cartridge for it, which is another expense.
how'd you know?
Because I used to have them. I owned a very nice stereo system back in the day.
If
Yeah.
we could go back away from innovation in sound reproduction
Hey,
to the environment,
I
Jason?
still like building a fire, there's something to be said for the old ways every once in a while. I have a question for Doug regarding the switch from coal at the power company he worked for. How much of that how much are subsidies and or penalties involved in that transition? Because one of the things I find is that subsidies can kind of hide true costs and make it very difficult to figure out where we're at. And I'm thinking of things like ethanol in gasoline, right? There's a lot of folks talking about how, oh, it's really just a subsidy for corn farmers, et cetera, et cetera. And when you balance all the math, it ends up going one way or the other way. I'm not up to speed on exactly where that is, but I've seen some of those debates. So it's a question I have. And regarding this transition, I mean, anytime you transition, a lot of the systems are going to be different, and therefore the way the costs are spread. Like storage in something that's electricity based is going to be much increased over something like a liquid fuel, right? I mean, a liquid fuel storage tank, you can stamp one out of sheet metal or plastic, and you're done. Batteries are a little more labor intensive, resource intensive, et cetera, et cetera. There's disposal costs, there's all kinds of stuff, and then there's scaling. Not saying it's not going to be practical, especially as costs go up on the past system. But what I'm waiting for and is the first photovoltaic plant that's running on photovoltaic power. Because to my knowledge, there isn't one yet. And that's when, when they can operate that efficiently at a cheaper price, considering they can produce their own panels, right? That should be kind of like the point where the thing starts to fall into being what I would call really viable.
Yeah.
Jason.
Yes. I really like my electricity. I really like things like air conditioning and indoor lighting. But you know what else I really, really enjoy? I like eating. I like food. I especially like hamburgers. And I am not against solar technology per se, but I think we have to implement our solar solutions in a smart, thoughtful way, because too often solar is misappropriately applied to areas of agricultural lands, wildlife sanctuaries, and I think we need to be more conscientious about where we allow energy utility companies to place solar. And I think we need to also take into account the true cost of solar. We have to take into account the full life cycle of the solar panels themselves. What is the downstream waste cycle going to be like in terms of recycling these used up solar panels?
That would be a good presentation topic. I think we don't want to get into it today and here and now. I'd like to get back to,
Or maybe not build solar arrays where we do livestock raising. You know, we need
we're going to
cattle.
do away with livestock raising. That's another of the subjects in this array of optimistic views of the future of
I like
disruptive
my hamburger.
innovation.
I like my hamburgers. Don't take my hamburgers or steak away, David.
You can pay for your hamburger all you want to. It's just going to be more expensive than some of the other ways to feed people in the next 10 years.
Jason, I remember you doing a presentation on precision fermentation, including meat production and so forth.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Actually,
he did a presentation a couple of years ago.
it's been shown that solar panels in fields where sheep graze it works very well. So I don't know, cattle might be too large to work.
If I can bring us back to
Yeah.
the future,
Okay, go ahead.
Back to the Future.
In this video, we're going to explore how to rethink
Jason?
I don't know if his hand is still up from before or not.
No, it's up.
Okay, go ahead, Jason.
You're muted, Jason.
Hi, I'm sorry. I was having trouble there. I like this guy. Finally somebody's talking some sense. Are you sure he's an environmentalist? He doesn't sound like a socialist to me. No, just kidding. No, but he gets it. He gets it in the fact of what I said before about not viewing private industry and the economy as a whole as the enemy. The surest path forward to being pragmatic and effective towards healing the environment and reversing ecological damage is to work with the very sectors of the economy that drive the economic engines of prosperity. Because let's face it, we're not going to kill 50 million people or even 1 billion people to save the planet. We're not going to let people starve en masse. But with population growth on the table, I just like to say, if we believe the demographic data trends as futurists, and we look closely at the data points coming out of Peter Zeihan, Elon Musk, and others, human population is falling off a cliff in most of the developed world. If we want the population to continue to fall in places like Africa and other places where it still continues to grow, just further prosperitize or industrialize those regions of the world. And things like feminism and other Western...
I think the word you're looking for was urbanization. Urbanize.
Will cause a precipitous fall in the human population by next century.
Which is a great thing looked at one way for the environment.
Culturally, not so good, but sovereignty-wise, not so good. But yeah, I think that it's going to take about 100 years, but we will transition to cleaner forms of energy. We will figure this out in the end. This is going to be but a footnote in history as to that century where everybody was panicked and worried about where we got our energy sources from, and we found the solutions. But yeah, no, this guy, I'm glad to see an environmentalist not denigrating private industry, because private industry makes government possible, and government is, I still don't believe government is the solution to these problems, especially environmental. It's just, it can't be if you look at mathematically. Anyway, I'll shut up now. Thank you.
Okay, I'm next. Our problem is humans are reactive, not proactive. And that's served us pretty well. We're pretty good at escaping danger and so forth when it's imminent. This we don't see as imminent, but it is. We're rapidly approaching irreversible changes, such as the melting of the permafrost, which will release, I don't know, megatons or gigatons of methane in the atmosphere over a short period of time. And things like disruption of the ocean currents. If the stream that goes from the Gulf of Mexico up to the North Sea is disrupted, which is, we have evidence that it's starting to be, the climate in Europe's going to change greatly. They actually might get colder. But there's a lot of disruptions that will be irreversible if we don't act very quickly, like in the next 10 years. We don't have 100 years. Go ahead, Tom. Tom.
I think some of these irreversible things are already irreversible. We're going to live in interesting times. On a personal level, though, bloodletting, that is to say, blood donating, is good for you. Really?
Depends on how much.
If I give a unit every 6 to 8 weeks,
Provided you don't overdo it, it's good for you.
and my doctor says that it's part of the reason my health is as good as it is. When you donate a pint of blood, nominally called a pint, it's what, 756 milliliters, whatever it is. Your body notices this, and so it makes new red blood cells for you. These are unencumbered by old pieces of cholesterol and other things that they've been carting about. So you effectively get new blood.
There's an analogy coming, I'll bet.
No, it's just, it's a plug to have you join me in donating blood. Is what it's a plug
Thank you.
for. If I don't have it with me, I will try and remember next time to show you my 10-gallon pin. No, 100-pint tin pin. 10-gallon is the next one.
Okay, Chris.
The gentleman's analogy about a burning house is, well, no analogy is perfect. But I thought that analogy was pretty far from perfect. Of course it helps. It's not necessary to put out every last, it is necessary to put out every last touch of flame if your house is burning. It's not necessary to put out every fraction of the flame that is put out helps. It's not necessary to get to net zero. It's necessary to get to the point where the carbon dioxide in it being put into the atmosphere is less than the carbon dioxide that is being taken out of the atmosphere. It would be good to get to net zero, but its analogy is flawed. That's all. Nothing profound there.
With regard to your mathematics, Chris, you can't get to withdrawing before you hit zero.
Well, you can do both.
It's farther on it's down the mathematical line beyond zero.
I would. Do you think you get no benefit from decreasing?
We can talk about what the limit, what the ecology needs to be, once we've agreed that it's a good thing,
It's a good thing to decrease fossil fuel use. It's a good thing to decrease it by 1%, 2%, 3%, 9%, 10%. It doesn't have to go to 0% before it becomes good.
okay, I would agree with that.
Okay, that's all I'm saying. Nothing, as I said before, nothing profound there.
Hey, Stan, you're next.
Well, I think that the point that we're trying to make here is that you want to get the carbon in the air that's overabundant back into the ground. And so we have to, that's called mitigation. And we're still, as far as I can tell, and when I hear the oil industry saying when you hear what the oil industry is really doing, is they're planning for more production. And we're still breaking records every year. So we haven't even peaked in terms of our actual use of fossil fuels. We haven't even peaked yet. And I think that as long as this philosophy of status quo, which is what I think the inertia of the economy is being forced on us with the help of the people that are raking in huge quantities of cash on this, are such that we, I would say that even if we could stop the increase of our use of fossil fuel, that would be a goal, but that is only the beginning of what we need to do to get down to not having any more emission that is essentially to be able to get down to where we can start to mitigate the amount of carbon that's in the atmosphere already. And I think that with the illusion that the oil companies have, that the magic trick that they're using, the misinformation or what do the mad magicians use the word, misdirection, is that we don't see it. If we could look up into the sky and see the same thing that you would see if you were on top of a garbage pit, if you were looking up and saw the same amount of debris in the sky, blocking out the sun and blocking out the atmosphere, as if you were looking down on a landfill, that's what we're doing. And nobody notices it because it's transparent. I mean, if you had special lenses, you could see the purple carbon dioxide quantities in the air, but they're able to disguise that because we're sort of not used to watching for that kind of thing. It's not on our side. We don't have that sensor to see that kind of thing.
Jason?
Yeah, I
Just a
wanted to
second.
respond. I wanted to respond to what
Jason,
Tom.
could I respond to Stan first and then
Could I
I'll let you
respond to
in
Stan
again?
for just a
Yeah,
second?
let David go first. It's his presentation.
Thank you. Now I lost it.
All right.
Stan, what were you saying?
No, I was saying that
No, Stan, what were you saying?
Stan was finished.
Stan, but David was going to respond to Stan.
Well, I think what I was saying is that we haven't even stopped increasing
Right.
our output. I mean, oil companies are planning on investing more. To talk about stranded assets, they're trying to build more oil wells. They see now the Arctic is going to be a perfect place for them. And by the way, Jason, where did you say there's a huge quantity of natural gas that we can get out of the ocean? Whereabouts are you talking about?
That's a side issue I'd like
Yeah.
to put off for a bit. What I wanted to say, Stan, was that the whole carbon cycle is a cycle, and plants and animals have been on that cycle on Earth for billions of years, and it's worked pretty well till we started messing with the balance. Since we are now in a position where we're going to mess with the balance of the carbon cycle, regardless of what direction we go, we're going to disturb that cycle. We're messing with our economy has gotten big enough that it messes up the carbon balance. Now we either have to choose to change that or live and adapt to the ecological changes we've caused. In a way, that's what RethinkX is talking about here. We need to start thinking about, debating, figuring out how to manage our economy, whether or not we like it, or else nature will manage it for us. And that usually is in terms of civilizational collapse. We'd like to avoid that. I think we would all agree that we'd like to avoid that, wouldn't we?
Well, I saw a commercial. I didn't know if
Okay.
I liked it, but it was Apple. Apple was using a commercial where Mother Nature was a part of their board of directors, but it was a black woman, and so forth, and they were just not particularly. I mean, I'd like to see that the environment could be on the board of director of every large oil company. But I think that if you allow the oil companies to determine on their time schedule when they're going to allow this thing to turn down, it's going to be when their profitability starts to look kind of grim. And that's not, the earth isn't going to respond to that very well at all. I mean, I think that
Okay.
the Kardashev
Let's let Jason
scale,
get in.
okay,
Jason, you're up.
Okay. I was going to say is I get my food from the grocery store primarily. I'm sure that many of you as well get your food from the grocery store. Although demographics are collapsing worldwide in industrialized Western nations, the population does still continue to grow for the time being, births over deaths. The economy, which we all rely and depend upon in various ways for basic necessities, life-sustaining, basic life support systems, the economy, it continues to grow. And that's a good thing because we humans would die without it. Not compromise our lifestyle, but we would literally die without it. Civilization would collapse. We need an economy to keep the lights of civilization burning on. And these evil oil companies that we speak of, these demons in disguise, these horrible profiteers. Oh, by the way, companies need to make a profit in order to continue to exist. And we can have a conversation about that, but without
Some other week, please.
without these energy companies, all of it comes crashing to a halt, a screeching halt, because energy is the fundamental unit, the driver, the fuel that keeps all of this going. Our lights on, our homes warm in the wintertime, our homes cool in the summertime. It keeps the pharmaceutical supplies flowing. It keeps the food in the grocery stores. What do you suppose would happen if all of that just stopped? Like,
It's not all going to stop.
but without oil and energy supplies, it would, because that's what makes it possible. We can't run freight trains and airlines and semi trucks off of hopes, dreams, and wishes. we've got to think about this realistically. And that means that we, for better or worse, these oil companies, we owe a lot to them. We owe our living standards, we owe our innovation and prosperity and our technological advancements. We owe all of that to them. The hard work that the men and women on the oil derricks and in far off remote places that go to extract these energy sources, you know, these many of the people behind the curtain when it comes to these oil companies, they're just normal human beings that are trying to support themselves and their families. They're not.
Thank you. You introduced
okay.
my next video nicely. Can I play it now?
We do have 2 more hands up, but I guess we'll take your presentation and then more questions.
Thank you. You can, I'm quite happy to let people back in, but this is such a nice introduction. Can I put you off just a little bit, H-Tom?
Sure.
H-Tom, you had your hand up before I showed this.
Yes, he did.
You're muted.
Of course I'm muted. The first thing on my list before I forget it, remember to get your snow tires. The second thing on the list is recycling the cost of wind towers and wind tower blades doesn't seem to have been a factor in anybody's calculations, but it's been discovered that it's what's that horrible bad word? Expensive, if possible. And the other thing is I'm not sure where this guy got his engineering degree, or if he has one, it should be taken away. A 4-day national electrical power supply. No, that does not work. That's not enough. I think I can point at Texas and say, see, 4 days, not enough.
He's an ecologist.
Is that it?
I could talk about other things, but no, that's enough.
Okay. I just wanted to comment on something that I guess that Jason said earlier. I'm gonna characterize you, Jason, as something you probably never heard before. I think you're Pollyanna. You underestimate the effects of climate change and the urgency, I think, that I'm feeling that we need to take to solve this problem. And it's going to take both industry, corporations, and government together, working together to do it. That's all. Chris.
Hey, I think this gentleman is overly optimistic, but it is very, very refreshing to hear an optimistic take on this. I sincerely hope he's right. It is not impossible that he is. There is nothing against the laws of physics for him being right. And thank you so much, David, for a very nice, optimistic presentation of the possibilities of solving these problems. It's very, very refreshing to hear this. I hope he's right. Yeah. I suspect he's a little overly optimistic, but I sure hope he's right. Thank you, David.
Sure. Well, and you did comment that you thought he sounded like he was trying to sell something. I don't think there's any question about that. I'll mention the title of the book again. It's worth the read. You can get it from the library, or you can buy it.
Okay, Carol has a question or remark. Go ahead, Carol.
And you're muted.
Okay. Two points that I think we should be thinking about. And the first is, and some of these things were mentioned by Tom earlier, tipping points. The notion that, you know, all of a sudden, we used to call it the Gulf Stream. I think now we're supposed to call it AMOX. But this thing collapses. It ceases to warm Northern Europe. And we literally end up with England and Norway and places like that under glaciers. And then the tipping point that Tom mentioned was the thawing of the permafrost, which, I mean, you know how much of Russia or Siberia is under permafrost? And that thawing, you know, just dumps tons of methane into the air. And methane is even worse than CO2. So we have these various tipping point problems that they get in the way of the nice, smooth, exponential, and later S curves that this guy's talking about. But there are solutions on the scale.
Crazy Karen. And at number 3.
Beth?
Go ahead, Carol.
There are solutions on the same scale as the tipping point disasters. The first one would be, I don't know if you guys remember my presentation on solar power from outer space. You know, where the sun always shines. And you put solar power stations, which are just basically great big mirrors, into geosynchronous orbits, and all of a sudden you are beaming down all the power anybody needs without burning any fossil fuels and, you know, without having to have superb batteries and et cetera, et cetera. It's a hell of a big engineering feat, but we are capable of doing it.
And it may have some side effects that we're not aware of yet.
Any of these other things we're talking about doing also?
Oh, they all may have side effects, yes.
But the other suggestion that I have made for great big, you know, lumpers of changes, again, what used to be called the Gulf Stream and is now called AMOX for Atlantic Meridian something or other. That could be addressed on a major scale because it is actually the possible collapse of the Gulf Stream is based on salinization problems. As you melt glaciers in Greenland and other places, all of this melt desalinates the northern Atlantic. And that's what's going to cause the collapse of the Gulf Stream. And I would suggest that a major engineering feat of desalination plants in the northern Atlantic, which are dumping all of their salt back into the northern Atlantic where we need it, and pumping the water produced to, say, the Middle East. Big engineering project, but it looks to me like we're going to need some big engineering project.
We probably ought to add geoengineering to the list of topics we'd like to do presentations on in the future.
Well, I have actually done presentations in the past on both of those. I don't know if any of you saw them or remember them, but
Okay, Jason, you're next.
I don't like. I want to state for the record that I too consider the environment an important and noble endeavor. I consider climate change to be a credible threat, and I don't personally, for one, like being a shill for the oil companies, but y'all are forcing me to do it because somebody in the room has to be the voice of reason when it comes to a fair and balanced discussion when it comes to our economic and civilizational realities. That being said, you made a comment earlier, Tom, about you feeling emotionally that this is a much graver threat than what I give it credit for. And I'm reminded about something very relevant during the pandemic, that it was shown, it was proven conclusively, they took polls of how severe the COVID threat was to an individual's survival. And it was shown that certain segments of the population emotionally felt that the pandemic, COVID-19, was a far larger threat than what it actually was on a per capita survival basis. That being said, we should not allow our emotions to overrule our rational and scientific assessments of what climate change, the threat matrix of what climate change actually represents. Because at this rate, given the matrix of the threats we currently face, I don't think we're going to have to worry about climate change, because the likelihood of us fighting a nuclear war is becoming a greater threat day by day. And at this rate, that will be the greater threat to civilization than climate change. And if that happens, well, but it's been shown that we don't really know where the environmental tipping points are. History, we've got a long history of showing time and time again that we get the tipping points completely wrong. That's not necessarily the fault of the scientists. We weren't a data gathering society back in the last ice ages and whatnot. So really, we're largely playing a guessing time game here when it comes to what tipping points actually are, and we might, and even if we do find conclusively where the tipping points are, what are we supposed to do? Are we just supposed to wake up one day and not turn our cars on ever again, or ever get our food from the grocery stores ever again? I mean, we're not left with a whole lot of terribly good options here. And so I get it. I understand the arguments on both sides. And if I hear too much rhetoric coming out of one side, I'm going to play the devil's advocate and make the other side of the conversation, regardless of whether or not the plurality of the audience wants to hear it. So,
Thank
yeah.
you.
Okay, I just posted a TED Talk, it's pretty recent, about climate change tipping points. And I suppose the variance of the timeframes might not be perfect, as Jason pointed out, but I think that there is a specific quality to his research. So I just posted that to the chat. And in regards to Carol's comment about putting reflectors in space, as far as that technology is concerned, if we could advance the technology and engineering that could do that, we might also be able to advance a technology and an engineering that would tap into geothermal opportunities. We have a constant source of heat and energy down below as well as up above. And I know that there are and that's an opportunity for the oil companies to use their already proven expertise to dig down to start that process. And if you need to go deeper than that, there are some laser, I think there's a laser feature that comes into play with the fusion reactors that might be able to knock some of that debris out of the way. And so, and there's also kind of like a fracking process that cracks that instead of using harsh chemicals, they kind of do the same thing as fracking, but they get an outcome that's a constant geothermal resource as well.
That's Google's pairing with a small company.
Kerry.
All right. So I recently went to a presentation by a PhD level scientist whose specialty was sea ice. So he was heavily involved in climate change and whatnot, because I think that's where a large portion of his funding came from. But anyway, one of the questions I asked him was, his presentation was very heavy on information about positive feedback loops. And if you've studied climate change over history prior to people, I mean, temperatures went up, temperatures went down, they were all over the place, right? Which I'm not saying that people aren't influencing the temperature right now. But what I asked him is like, so what's the state of our understanding of negative feedback loops? Because I don't hear a whole lot about this. And he said, well, there actually hasn't been that much in the way of study in that area. We know a few, but we need to learn more. That seems like a big hole in when we're projecting this stuff forward, if we don't have a really solid handle on this stuff. It's kind of like I'm hearing people talk about the thermohaline circulation breaking down and causing an ice age, in the upper latitudes, but at the same time, the permafrost thawing. I mean, the permafrost isn't going to thaw if it's under a glacier, right? So there's kind of some balances here that we need to understand.
Europe versus Asia, that's different.
Okay. Either way, Upton Sinclair had a quote. It's difficult to get a man to understand something when his salary depends on his not understanding it. And I think part of the problem here is a lot of the solutions have a huge financial incentive. One of the things I don't hear about is folks planting trees, right? That seems to be one of the cheapest, least controversial options to sequester carbon that you could propose, right? And it has the benefit of increasing, an environmental refuge for critters and all of that stuff. And I find it odd that I don't hear more of a push in that realm, which makes me suspicious of all of the supposed remedies that necessitate huge investments in capital.
Or hemp.
Precisely. And again, not saying that there's not an issue, just I want to know more before I go running straight into that room and say, here's my wallet.
Your skepticism is highly appreciated. Thank you.
Carol.
I would like to play Advocata Diaboli to Jason's devil's advocate and mention that he has failed to mention that the US government is heavily subsidizing the oil companies' production. That certainly is a factor that ought to be considered when we're talking about practical stuff.
An interesting point that Rethink makes a number of times in their other videos. If we're going to stop burning fossil fuels, we should stop subsidizing the fossil fuel companies. And if we're going to take care of the people who are going to get laid off when we stop burning fossil fuels, that's a much higher priority than protecting the big corporations that are going to be disrupted.
Point of clarification, those subsidies come in the form of tax breaks, which just basically amounts to we'll steal less of your profit revenue. They're not actually giving the companies money from the taxpayers. It's not a welfare benefit. It's just we're going to take less of your profit margins.
Right. But somebody has to support our government if we expect to have a government. And if the corporations pay less, that just leaves a little more for the rest of us. Unless, of course, we want to continue to build up the federal debt, and that has effects on the value of our money and the whole inflation issue. But that's beyond the scope of this discussion.
It's
But
just
I think it is
it's just
something
that
that
the way it was framed, it made it sound like the government was giving wheelbarrows full of money to the oil companies.
They are.
In effect, they almost pay no tax.
Tax breaks, not.
Exactly.
Which
Who's
amount to
next?
billions of dollars. Yeah. Are you done, Carol?
yes, I just
Okay. I just want to make the point that when we're talking about the Holocene and geological changes, they're very slow. They occur over tens of thousands or even hundreds or millions of years. This change that we're causing now, some controversy about that, but this is happening over a very short period, like a couple hundred years, and
Make it 20.
well, a couple hundred, when the Industrial Revolution started,
Yeah,
we
yeah,
started
okay.
on this curve, but it's accelerating, and so the Earth can't adjust the way it used to be able to geological changes, and so we're going to be reaching some tipping points fairly soon, and planting trees. And another thing that wasn't mentioned is bamboo, which grows very fast and can sequester carbon very well, is being done. It needs to be done on a larger scale.
And in fact, we're still taking trees down in places like the Amazon.
Yeah, there are programs to repopulate the trees in that area, but the net right now is loss of forestation. Canada's pretty bad with that too. Carrie, you're up.
Yeah, so on that point, this is kind of interesting. I've been looking at some charts lately regarding CO2 levels, and I mean, one of the issues I think with the rate of change, I mean, I don't find it. I accept the fact that the rate now is very, very quick in terms of past examples of CO2 change. But the resolution of our understanding of how things happened in the past is pretty bad just because of the way we take the samples as opposed to now. I mean, I can get an hour by hour readout now when I'm taking an ice core sample. I mean, the resolution is less. But what was interesting is if you go back, 400, 500 million years ago, I mean, the CO2 levels were really high. But if you measure CO2 levels, it seems like they went up, and when they went down, it was quite a precipitous drop, and those were punctuated by mass extinctions. So in terms of these negative feedback loops, because I mean, hey, the Earth hasn't turned into Venus, and it only turned into a snowball, I guess, once, and then it came back from that. But none of those are good outcomes. And there seems to be some kind of association with a drop in CO2 and extinctions, or it's the rise and the extinction. But either way, there's a interesting chart. I can try and dig it up if anyone's interested in
There's a sweet spot we'd like to stay within. Yes.
I presented about a year ago, I think, on that.
H-Tom?
I forget what I was going to ask.
Okay, I'll give you a chance to think of it again.
Oh,
I'd like to put in a plug for 2 weeks from now. I'm calling it a medley, but basically we don't have a single presenter. So if you can find or think of or see a video that you think might be interesting for us for on the order of half an hour of presentation, I'd love to hear from a couple more people about things that we could talk about that week. And if not, we'll talk about what kinds of future topics we should be paying attention to that nobody's done a presentation on lately.
Okay, go ahead, Kerry.
Oh, I was just going to respond to David and ask if he saw my message. I had missed your message.
Yeah.
Okay, great.
And I looked at both of them, and neither of them grabbed me particularly, but that's just me. So pick something, and I'll plan on you for half an hour.
I'll keep digging.
Okay, it's noon. Do you have a conclusion or anything, David? I don't think we have time for another video.
No, the next video is 10 minutes. And you probably will see some more of this unless something more interesting comes up in a couple of months.
Great video, David. Thank you.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Thank you, David.
Let me ask the question, David. Do you have enough material to give us part 2 in that 2 weeks from now slot?
I really don't want to be the presenter of last resort. It's bad enough scheduling them.
Well, yes, but many times.
Do I have enough more? Yes, we could spend 3 or 4 more sessions just watching their videos without any problem.
Well, a number of times. I mean, it happened to me, and it's happened with a number of other people. We're working on a really good topic, and really,
we can work on it again in a couple of months.
Well, I would like to see part 2, where you get to your other videos.
Okay, but you don't want to do that in the next 2 weeks, you're saying, David, is that correct?
I'd like to see the mission from Mars.
The which?
The mission to Mars. Dig into that and just explore it.
I would prefer to see us do a mission to Venus. Floating habitats in the atmosphere of Venus seems to me to be a much more reasonable way to go, just because of the gravitational effects on the human body. But that's
just a
topic for discussion if someone wants to tackle it.
I saw a piece this week that Elton could probably park a super heavy up at one of the Lagrange points.
Park a what?
A super heavy what?
Oh, that's one of the rockets.
His big
SpaceX
giant
is
rockets.
Yeah.
You could just send, not bring it back, send it up, park it at a Lagrange point in orbit, and then other people could visit it and turn it into a satellite, occupiable
Habitat?
habitat.
I think the L5 people have lots of blueprints for that.
Yeah, I
Mhm.
was gonna say L5 would be a good point for good
Yeah.
point for that.
Well,
Okay, well,
considering the improbability of catching that heavy booster with a couple of chopsticks, really does turn our head a little bit about the promise of new technology.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
I thought of that as being totally out of the ballpark, and he landed.
That was an in-your-face, we can do this thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, if you haven't seen the video, there are some stunning videos of that catch.
Yeah.
Yeah.
From about 150 different drones circling it while they're coming down.
Yep. Thank you all for coming.
yeah,
And
thanks.
thank you
David.
for the start of an excellent presentation.
That's why I don't want to do it again in 2 weeks. I can't duplicate it that fast.